now at 800-900-8000. Results may vary. Consult your financial advisor before investing. Call 800-900-8000. That's 800-900-8000.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this hour of the Shaun Thompson Show is sponsored exclusively by DonleyAuctions.com. They need your guns. Sell for top dollar. DonleyAuctions.com.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Shaun Thompson, and this is the Shaun Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
I can't decide who is more proud of my next guest, his parents or his kids. He's briefed Congress, advised Senate Department, COVID-19's origins. But when you listen to the doctor and we talk about his new book, please understand the kind of person you're talking to or you're listening to. He's the founder and CEO of Atossa Therapeutics. He is the inventor and or co-inventor of 7 drugs approved by the United States FDA, and those drugs are used by over 80 million patients worldwide. He holds 94 U.S. patents, author of more than 395 peer-reviewed publications with over 12,000 citations. The name of the new book is The Code as Witness, How the COVID Genome Reveals the Lab Origins and How to Prevent Future Outbreaks, and he's about to be interviewed by somebody not wearing pants. Dr. Stephen Quay, how are you?
Oh, I'm great, but you left out the fact that I grew up right next door in Michigan, so I stick to my roots.
Good, very good, very good, very smart, and you were smart enough probably not to go into the Chicago after dark, which makes it wonderful, and it also is something that growing up around these areas and growing up the way we did and the way you learned how to think, you were probably suspicious from this right from the get-go, were you?
Yeah, I'm afraid I was on this one. It just, for maybe a month or so, it came from a market. Okay, then you move on to other things. But the more I got involved with it, actually trying to come up with therapies that would be useful and looking at it, the more it didn't make sense.
Well, what really offends me on behalf of your knowledge and resume and hard work is that a lot of nefarious people hide under the titles you worked for. And I noticed this very early on when it comes to doctors and scientists. It's the credibility of a few that gives virtue to the many. And I never liked any of the story, any of it, from the get-go. And the more you look into the government and the more you look into the corruption, the silver lining as I see it, and I have not gone through your book, it pretty much is undeniable at this moment, at this time in history, what COVID really was and how it was created. Would you say that that's the basis of your book?
Well, the book is 2 parts, and both are equally important. Or I'd say the second part is it came from a lab and that it wasn't engineered in the lab before it came out. Second part of the book is what the heck do we do now to prevent the next pandemic?
How do you unpregnate this situation? And it's there. And from what we know, there may be more. I mean, do we know exactly and specifically how, and I've been calling it a bioweapon since I saw Fauci give me an excuse. But when you look at this, how do we even know how much more could potentially be there? Do we have access to that information? Have you been given access? Because I'm assuming because you advised the State Department and Congress, you briefed Congress, is there more to be worried about?
Well, there is, Shaun. So as part of the process that I've done over the last 5 years was I and some colleagues in New Zealand and Puerto Rico, if you can imagine how the internet puts people together, have come up with forensic tools that allow us to actually go into the back door of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And, SARS-CoV-2 is 1% lethal, so that's your standard. But they were working on a 30% lethal virus, a 47% lethal virus, and a 75% lethal virus at the same time. So luckily, the 1% one was the one that had an accident and leaked out because otherwise we'd be in much deeper trouble.
And I'm curious to know, has there been any resolution to this? Has there been any awareness between the parties involved that the other things that are 1,000 times more dangerous to mankind can never be let out? And have they been destroyed?
You know, it's certainly hard to tell what's going on in other countries, but there is enough public attention, I believe, around a very small fraction of experiments called dangerous gain of function and gain of opportunity research that with further, public support, I think Congress and some of the other bodies that control this research will put guardrails around it.
Well, I love the fact that you still have that optimism. Being just a street guy from Chicago and seeing what the political parties have done to it, I have less faith in the institution that would operate and then negotiate and create such weapons. And in the first excuse, what was the excuse used to have this go on, to have this kind of thing go on? It always seemed like a cover story for bioweapons to me. At what point do the scientists who are in charge realize exactly what they're creating and the reality and the dangers of it? I mean, I don't feel that there's been enough repercussion for what happened. And I'm wondering, is the guardrails you speak of, does that include repercussions? That's the part I find most offensive.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I try to be forward-looking, and I try to be solution focused. So there probably need to be repercussions for some of the people that did this. My talents and time are being spent on what sort of things can we do inside of government, inside of the United Nations, inside of all of these bodies to prevent this from continuing and or happening again in any way that can hurt people.
I'm curious to know your thoughts from what we lived through and how we were sold the so-called cure or vaccine. I'm curious to know what your thoughts were during that process. Like I said, I'm a neighborhood guy who's suspicious of everybody. But what were you thinking when that happened, and all of what you had to go through to hold the patents you hold, and all you had to go through to prove what your inventions in medicine, what they were, what you thought they were? How did you feel about what we lived through when it came to the so-called vaccine?
Well, I mean, you have to remember that you're doing this in real time. You've never experienced it before. And so each bit of data that you take in allows you to do an analysis, and then you go to the next piece of data. So, as I always say, retrospect is 2020, but you have to be careful about imagining what you would have done in the setting there. I mean, that comes up a lot when I invent things, because a lot of people, once they see your invention, they say, oh, it was obvious. But, if you look at what was going on the day before I invented it, it wasn't so obvious. On the one hand, the development of the vaccines was a phenomenal exercise in, from start to finish, and doing it in, under a year with the technology that was used there. There were signals in, 2020 and late 2020, early 2020, of things that should have been watched, I guess, more carefully, if you could say it that way. It was probably, gosh, I want to say July of 2020 when I first saw the distribution of the vaccine in rodents, which is a typical experiment you do. 12% of the injection was going to the ovaries and the testes. I thought, wow, I've never seen a drug. I've never seen anything. I've been looking at drugs for 40 years. I've never seen anything get injected and end up in the ovaries and the testes at that level. And what that does is it doesn't stop you cold, but it should trigger, some very intense observations of things around those particular organs as you move forward.
Yes. Fascinating to circle that any of us are alive and all of the things that happen. So with your expertise, could something this harmful, potentially harmful to mankind, could it have happened naturally, in your opinion, now that you look back, because you have that 20/20 vision of history? When you sit back at this, could something happen like this naturally, organically? Or do we live in this miracle, invisible hand balance where something this detrimental to mankind is extremely rare, if possible at all? Could something like this have existed if it would have never been created by man?
So, Shaun, you're getting into an area. You're in the area of one of the post-its on my wall, and there are about 100 of them. of things I want to do in the coming future, in the coming months, and that sort of thing. But it is the question: is nature capable of producing something that's as rapidly transmitting, as asymptomatically transmitting, as contagious, et cetera, as SARS-CoV-2? And my current hypothesis is that nature is not capable of that. I want to really run that to ground because that would be really important if I could establish that as a principle. But, the previous two SARS outbreaks from nature infected 10,000 people in both cases, under 10,000, 8 to 10,000 in both cases, and killed about 700 to 1,200 in both cases. That's kind of what these SARS viruses can do when they come from nature.
I don't know much, nearly a thimble of what you know. But it seems to be fascinating when you look at history, right? And you go back to all of the plagues and all of the different things that has affected man. To me, I'm not as impressed by the diseases as I am with the human body and the capability to survive them and adapt and overcome and the immune systems. Is this something that without a vaccine, although extremely dangerous on paper and thought to be dangerous, is this something where mankind can in fact adapt the immune system through different exposures to one day have it not be as dangerous as even thought of, even if the others get let out? Or is this something that will always be able to kill us?
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question if you're talking about SARS-2 specifically, but when a new virus comes to the human, we have two tools. We have our medieval, siege instruments for castles, for taking over castles, called the innate immune system. It attacks anything foreign, but it actually is kind of sloppy, and so it causes a fever, it causes chills, if it kills you before you get to the adaptive immune system, it doesn't transmit very well. Viruses are playing a kind of a dangerous game where too much, too little, it's kind of a Goldilocks. If they kill you too fast, they don't transmit. If they don't, transmit to another person, they don't survive. So, getting back to my initial working hypothesis, I don't think nature is capable of hurting us as badly as we hurt ourselves here with this virus.
Right, and the idea that we did adapt, when you really step back and look at the population of the world, and you look at what actually happened, and you look at the deaths and the chaos, and how much of it was maybe the reaction to the COVID, how would you rate this as if you were creating it to do harm? Did it do the harm that it was anticipated to? And I say this because I didn't take any vaccines, and I had it twice. I felt that it was pretty beatable. I went to work every day. I did the radio show every day. When you look back at what it really was and how it affected people who were not sick, who were not old, how kids were able to really combat it, what are your thoughts on the way in which we dealt with the disease itself?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit on a couple points. On March 14th of 2020, so about 2 weeks before lockdowns began and all of that stuff was going on, a paper with 85,000 people out of China was published that talked about, all of the things that you would want if you were a public policy sitting person, making advice. What you saw is that nobody under 20 died no matter what. And nobody from 2040 died if they didn't have a comorbidity. Now, if you had a couple comorbidities, if you had cancer and heart disease and obesity, you were in a 10% lethal environment. But the concept that this was dangerous to children, for example, or dangerous to healthy adults, was known in mid-March. That it wasn't the case, and so I wasn't a fly on the wall or in the room when decisions are being made. But had this paper been used to inform decisions, we might have done something different. We might have done different things.
It's fascinating because I can only imagine with the expertise you have in this field, what you were listening to on, as my father used to call it, and I'm sure somebody in your family referred to the boob tube as television, as on the boob tube, and you saw these people stoking really an unbelievable fear, and always hitting us where we're the most sensitive with our kids, always with the kids. And they shut the schools down, and they took away life in America, and then they said you couldn't do this and you couldn't as you are. You probably have a temper when you hear bald-faced lies or fraud or mistakes. What did you do? Did you maintain your marriage through it, or did you? How many remote controls on the TV did you break?
Luckily, I grew up with a lot of television in Michigan, and both my sister, who lives in Ann Arbor, and I are now television phobics, maybe because of it. But having said that, so we were watching the news and those sorts of things, and yeah, it was frustrating to see what they were saying and what they were doing, and just so counterintuitive. Again, another study out of China in March. Out of every 100 infections, 2 of them happened outside and 98 happened indoors. So when you see, police banning people from the beach in California, I mean, and this was available to the policymakers, so it was quite frustrating. And we ignored it pretty much.
Yes.
As a family.
One of the things, as like I said, kid from the neighborhood, right? I go to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and you start to get introduced to taxation and abuse and politics, right? That's how it normally works. And I would meet these people running for office. And I remember after we would leave, me and my friends, I'd say, this moron is going to be a senator. This idiot is going to be a congressman. And when you watched what happened with the representatives through the process, I personally was very impressed with a couple. But for the most part, I was really less than impressed, offended at the way in which representatives kind of thought about this or interviewed people who were experts or just took advice without examining it. When you were asked during COVID to go into Congress and brief them, or the State Department? Were you brought in during it? I'm curious.
Yeah, I briefed Congress 3 times, once in the House in 21, and then the Senate in 22, and the Senate in 23. So that was mostly around whether or not it came from the laboratory, whether or not it was engineered, whether or not it had aspects of non-civilian engineering, as I call it. Stay away from, other terms that are more provocative. But I did not get involved in the vaccine policies or any of the public health policies. I did talk about my perceptions on those, which were in line with there was something called the Great Barrington Declaration, which was
yes.
Put together by our now director of NIH, an Oxford scientist and a Harvard scientist. So pretty good credentialed people, and I signed it very early to basically say, let's protect our elderly because they are most vulnerable, and for people who are at no risk of dying from this, they should be allowed to get it, and then we can move on from that. That was was ignored at the time. And it's not 100% sure it would have worked if we had done that, but Sweden did do that. Sweden did the Great Barrington Declaration without calling it that, and the other Scandinavian countries were more of a lockdown, closed schools, and that sort of thing. The Sweden economy did much better than the other Scandinavian countries. They had the same number of deaths, so they didn't actually reduce deaths in Sweden. But they didn't disrupt their culture. They relied on the general common sense of their people, which that is one of my frustrations. Is that there's sometimes a sense that people don't have common sense, and it really I think that's a real disservice because the American people are a lot smarter than certain people give them credit for.
Well, in the Barrington Declaration, there were some repercussions to people who signed that. I'm curious, did you face any repercussions?
I'd like to. I prefer not to talk about.
No, that's fine. But the reason I think it's important, right? Because I make fun of the fact you're being interviewed from a guy with not wearing pants. However, when you really just step back and look at that, at your own life and what you've accomplished, it really is. I mean, your body of work places you in the top 1% of scientists worldwide. It's just amazing to me how this became, how it always seemed to be, but really became ultra political. And that's something I think if you were giving advice to your grandkids and you're an old man and you're not doing this anymore and your grandsons or daughters are going to be doctors, I would assume that one of the things somebody with your knowledge and wisdom would give is to be suspicious of every bit of information you ever hear. Do you feel that way, or am I just too pessimistic of growing up around shysters?
No, Shaun, and I want to make this very, very clear. This may be the most important point for your listeners is the scientific method, which has given us this incredible world that we live in, is based on nothing but complete skepticism about everything you hear and see. That's how we make advances. We don't make it by consensus around scientific truths. We get a fact and we say, well, what does this mean? And then you get a hypothesis, and then you test that, and then you throw it away if it's wrong. And so all of the dogma around science, to me, was almost heretic. It's almost heretical. I mean, I am actually a Christian, but my science is my life view, and to see people talk about it as a dogmatic principle rather than as a, to be skeptical and to be questioning, and that is what the essence of science is. And science isn't trusted anymore, and it's no wonder. But it started out on the right vein. It's the worldview that gets us the farthest in life with respect to technology. It's remarkable in that sense.
Well, I cannot wait to go through the book. My understanding is it comes out. Is it coming out tomorrow or a week from tomorrow?
It comes out Tuesday. So today's Friday, so you can pre-order it. You can get it at your house on Tuesday if you go to Amazon and pre-order it.
I am going to pre-order it. The Code as Witness, how the COVID genome reveals its lab origin and how to prevent future outbreaks. It really is a pleasure to talk to you and have the opportunity to talk to you. I really thank you on behalf of my unborn grandkids for writing this book, because the future will make its own judgment, but it'll need this information. So thank you, Dr. Stephen Quay. I really do appreciate it.
I do too. Thanks, Shaun. Have a great weekend.
You too. We'll be back with your calls and comments.
Call Shaun now. 312-642-5600.
President Trump has triggered a $200 billion tech disruption, and Wall Street